Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Kristen Eccleston, aka the Neurodiverse Teacher. And today, my guest is Chris Lake. Chris is the author of How to Help Your Toddler Meet Their Milestones 101 Behavior Hacks. He is a native New Yorker who has been working with children with developmental delays for the past 2 decades. He received his master's in both general and special education in 2012. And in 2014, he started Community for a Cause, a nonprofit to initially advocate for children with lead poisoning. This nonprofit has successfully worked to aid New Yorkers in all 5 boroughs as well as people abroad. Community for a Cause has several branches that include special needs advocacy, homeless relief, sexual violence prevention, environmental protection, and a community building branch. Through his charity, Chris remains committed to doing all he can to help those in New York who are without a voice and all those who are in need of support. So welcome, Chris, to the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Kristen. I appreciate that intro. That was glowing. Thanks.
I am very impressed by that intro. I mean, you have a lot going on. A lot of focus is all very much in that idea of service to others. So tell me the why behind what you do. What's your story that has led to you being passionate and wanting to do all of these things?
All right. Where to begin? So originally to start my charity, it was because of a class that I first had when I just got my master's and I got my first 8-to-1-to-2 classroom. And it was 8 little nuggets between 2 and 3 years old. I'm mostly working early intervention. And one child in particular had lead poisoning.
Okay.
Up to this point, I've seen lead poisoning in literally every single classroom I've worked with. And it's always raised a little hairy eyebrow for me because I asked myself, what's going on here? I thought this was done. And this is before Flint, Michigan was on the national mindscape. Mm-hmm. So I noticed with him in particular, the emotional challenges, the difficulty retaining skills that were mastered, items that were learned. And I asked myself again, what's happening here? And it really came to a head in graduation because the place I worked was very big on a performative graduation, which I myself am not a big fan of. But that aside, so for about 3 months, we practiced wheels in the bus routine. I literally built out of a wood frame bus and painted it and all this jazz. And the kids sat in on stage. And come graduation day, he was the only one who did not show. And I never saw him again, never heard from his family again. I have no idea what happened. But knowing my student, my best guess is that on the way out or during that morning, getting ready, he had a tantrum to end all tantrums. And the family said, you know what? Forget it. Forget it. And I understand. I do. I understand. But that was our last day. Summer vacation started thereafter. And I had this question like, is there some better way I could have served this child? My specialty, what I do in the field is applied behavior analysis. It's proven to be the most effective form of therapy for autism, for kids with autism, because because it's evidence-based and you can show the results. You can say, we did X for X amount of days and this is the result. However, I wondered with lead poisoning, it's a different physiological situation that's going on, especially the child is going home and getting re-exposed to the source of contamination, whether it's from lead in the paint or from the pipes, etc. So during my summer break, I came across a food documentary. I'm very food conscious. I like learning about food, where our food comes from, etc. And the movie was called Hungry for Change. And in it, Dr. Mike Adams very casually mentions that when you eat cilantro, it goes into your body, through your blood, eats toxic heavy metals, and removes it from your system. Right. And so when I heard this, still thinking heavy about my student, I had a true eureka moment. And I just, wait, what did you just say? And I rewound it like 8 times and I said, okay, first things first, Chris, let's do our research. So I go on Scholar Google and I'm looking up everything I can about cilantro, chelation, lead poisoning, playing with the algorithms and finding, while there is limited studies in general with anything plant related, any plant-based remedies, which we can get into later. That's another rabbit hole. But there was promising results that were found in reputably done studies, right? So I said, okay, if this is the case, then I need to get the word out somehow. And my friend invited me to a fashion show a few weeks later. I met a woman who was a lactation consultant. We just got into a conversation, said, you know what? let's throw a fashion show so that we can get people aware of the fact that there's some food that can be used potentially as medicine. I'm using air quotes because it does not treat, prevent, or mitigate symptoms, as the FDA would shout down my throat if I claimed that. But it does have promise, right? And it is harmless if you eat cilantro. If you eat too much cilantro, you're just gonna smell, right? So we started making calls. We called out models and fashion designers and jewelers. We got a venue. We got makeup artists. We got musicians. We threw an awesome show on winter solstice 2014 and didn't raise 1 red cent for smart boards like I aimed because it was the wrong crowd. A fashion-oriented crowd is not really too concerned about kids with special needs, and that's something growing pains, right? But in that process, I still made the conscious decision to create a 501c3 out of this.
Okay.
A year later, we tried again, another flop. Her and I split ways, but I still own this 501c3. And I said, well, what can I do with this? This is mine. And my wife guided me and said, listen, while Couture for a Cause is a great concept, and I see that now you're relegated to donating clothes to the homeless, you can't keep doing that. And she's a branding consultant expert, so she really helped me think about how do you brand your nonprofit, which was never a thought in my mindscape. I just wanted to help people, right? And I was really attached to the C for a C in the acronym that I created, and so I started going through, well, what else can I do with the letter C? It's not Couture for a Cause, so I was like, oh, community for a cause. What I ultimately want to do is have people in the community come together, work together for a cause that they care about and remedy it in some sort of fashion. And from there, I developed different branches that concern me. Homelessness, living in New York City. If you're riding on a subway, you're going to see it. And it's interesting, oddly enough, a lot of the branches that I opened were inspired because of my work with kids with special needs. I know that kids with special needs are at risk for being homeless after they age out, after their parents pass away. It's a story that's not reported in the news when it's too sad, right? There's some stories that are just too sad, and so it's not clickbait. So that it's just not going to be reported. I know that, unfortunately, trigger warning for anyone out there, kids with special needs are the most likely victims of sexual assault. And I have students that have had to call ACS on because of this situation, and that made me say, well, what can we do regarding this? So my passion stems from, as I say in my mission statement, it's protecting and providing for those who are vulnerable, and I don't just want it to mean one particular type of person. And as I have other people who I collaborate with, I try to expand it so that people of New York City and the boroughs and wider work together to just make this world a little lighter, in ways that we can. We might not fix the problem wholly, but maybe we can make things hurt a little less.
I love that. Oh, wow. That's amazing. So that's, no, but I mean, that's such an amazing story. And it sounds like it came from a place where it was like, oh, I had this idea, and it's just kind of evolved from there. And you've really been able to kind of narrow down and focus on the things that are really meaningful to you. And I like that. So many times you hear about a cause and it's very one area of focus, and you've been able to kind of make this one umbrella with these different paths. And I think that's really, really amazing.
Thank you. I blame my ADHD.
But you know what? If anything, that's one of the strengths, right? We know that that's one of the strengths of ADHD is you get this idea and then it just goes all over the place. So if anything, that's actually a good segue to my next question for you. So tell me about who you were as a student and how that helped to shape who you are and some of your interests.
So as a student, it's a tale of two cities, right? Because I could retain information relatively well, but I was always distracted at the same time. And growing up, I went to Catholic school through my first bout of college. And the resources, the psychological resources, in my experience, were non-existent. So I didn't know what was different about me. I just knew that I was different. I knew that I was having struggles that I didn't see my peers have. I knew that I had to mask myself before I knew what masking was, so that it wasn't obvious that I was different in different ways. And I found very convincing coping mechanisms. And interestingly enough, I was only able to see it in others. I knew I had it, but then I see other people. I say, "Oh, we're the same." I don't know what group we belong in, but you're also masking, and that's cool, man. But I see through you, and they're like, "How do you see me?" Because you're me. We're the same.
Yep.
But but since I could remember things that I needed to, that I coined as important, I was a student who settled on B plus, right? I could have easily been an A plus student, but once I realized that I could do my homework on the bus ride to school and everyone would be very okay with the results, why would I try any harder than that? Once I realized in my head, like, hey, Chris, graduating from high school, it doesn't really matter if you get like a 98 versus a 92. Why would I try any harder than that? Once I got, and then when I took the SATs and I saw, I had like a 1340 on it and I had access to, and I was a triathlete. Like I lined things up so that I had access to what kind of education I want, like collegiate education I wanted, which also allowed me to be lazy. I found very good ways to work hard so I can be lazy. That was me as a student.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
As someone who's ADHD, yep.
Yeah. And then once college hit, everything just exploded. And I had to really relearn what discipline was for me. I had to really learn what organization was for me. I really had to learn how to balance work and play. So that was challenging for a couple of years. And then I started to get my act together, and bit by bit said, these are things you need to do because you can't afford to miss this boat. I started asking myself or treating my life like there are windows in life that do close. Because I think some people are cavalier with their time and cavalier with their potential, to be honest. And maybe it's a fear of mine that I miss a window or I miss a boat. And I do have a fear of missing out on me. I have a fear of missing out on my potential and my opportunities because I have seen people who've missed it. And I said, ooh, that's okay. Take note. My dad told me a story. So my father was a professor and his mom was a teacher as well. So I come from a line of teachers and caregivers. My mom is a fantastic nurse. My dad was a great professor, as well as a lawyer. But he had a hard time coping with a teacher he had when he was young, growing up in the 50s. And he said the teacher was racist, and he came home and told his mom, like, what do I do? And she said, learn how to be not like him. And my dad passed that down on to me. And I think it's a very valuable way to look at people, because we can look at people we don't agree with or don't like and simply put them in a discard bin in our head, or have a series of different uncomfortable feelings towards them or angry feelings towards them. But if we let ourselves say that every experience in life is an offering of learning, then we can say, okay, this person is teaching me how not to be. This person in traffic is teaching me how not to drive. This person in life at this register is teaching me how not to respond to having a stressed day at work. This person on the other line is teaching me how not to talk to someone who is asking a very, very innocent question, which they should have answered better, as opposed to being, what's wrong with you? And I'm pulling your hair out. I don't think we have, I don't think anger serves most of us well. And I think if we take the time to really ask ourselves, well, this person might have some other stuff going on, and that's why they're acting this way, that might also help us wrap our head around why we should act not like them. They have their circumstance, they have their stuff.
That is a beautiful perspective. I don't know that I've even ever thought of it that way. You're right. It's so easy to get angry or frustrated with somebody when you see them handling things in a way that does not mesh with how you would like it to be handled. But you're right. It's a learning opportunity for you to go, I can be a better person because I know I'm not going to do this to somebody else, or I'm not going to handle it this way. And I think that's a really beautiful perspective, because most of the time, and I see that as almost like a learning opportunity, where most of the time we're just getting angry and we're not seeing it as the potential that it has for us to evolve or grow as a person.
Well, interestingly enough, a friend of mine who's also neurodiverse invited me to live with him my third semester at Boston College, because I was already ready to drop out. And he said, you don't want to leave college, man. Like, why don't you come live with me for a semester? My girlfriend's going abroad. And I got to say, thank you, Rich Shalala, one of the best people out there that I've known. And we lived together. And, at that time, I didn't know how to deal with my stuff, right? I just knew that I'm struggling and I have these challenges, whether it's focusing, this, that, the other thing. And, so I carried around a lot of anger. Anger or depression were almost always knocking at my doors. And he said, Chris, you need to rethink your anger. And he got me this book by this Buddhist monk called, it's literally called Anger by Thich Nhat Hanh. I highly recommend it. He recently passed away, I think last year or the year before, unfortunately. But it helped me to reframe my understanding of what emotions are. And I think a lot of times we take our emotions for granted. I'm not sure a lot of people put a lot of thought into what is my emotion. What is an emotion? Down the road after reading this book, I started like, oh, emotions are protein peptides. They're physical presence that are there based on a number of different factors. But again, different rabbit hole. But I would love to pick your brain one day about neuroanatomy and neurotransmitters and all that jazz, because I geek out on that.
Oh, yeah, I do too. I would love to talk to you about it.
So reading this book, the Thought Nishtan invites you to look at your anger as useful. He says it's like a boiling pot. You can use it. It's not something that you need to throw away. It's not something that you need to let out, so much as you can take it as an opportunity to transform who you are, your understanding of the issue at hand, or your understanding of your environment. And that really revolutionized my personal thinking and my understanding of anger. I had an experience just 2 days ago where someone triggered me. They were gaslighting me about taking something from my nonprofit that they were now trying to reframe as their own. And they was like, why are you getting upset? You shouldn't be upset. I was like, there is a righteous anger that exists where it's fine to be mad. It's fine to be loud because you are taking my stuff. And I needed 20 minutes to really process it. Like, Chris, you got angry. Like you got angry and they called you out on raising your voice. And while you are allowed to be angry, and I've had that experience a lot growing up where people didn't want me to be angry. And once I had to tell an employer, like, I'm allowed to have emotions. Don't tell me I can be mad. Everyone else running around here is mad. I know I'm a male in a primarily female dominant environment, and people might have their own responses. I'm not violent. I'm not aggressive. I'm not throwing things around, but I can be mad. Everyone's allowed to have their emotions. Just be safe how you express it, obviously. And
100%.
Right? So I rethought myself, Chris, you got angry, and you haven't been that angry in years. And I want you to take this opportunity to learn from not just what a better way to respond to that is, but to recognize the moment you get angry because someone's doing something, whether they're cutting you off or gaslighting you, whatever, to not raise your voice. Because if you are in that space, then you are slightly out of control, right? But also ask yourself, how do I use this? And so I went home that night. I worked out for the first time in a couple of weeks. I said, I'm going to let this transform. I'm going to burn this energy off with the workout. I'm going to use this as fuel to remind myself this is the last time someone is going to treat me in this manner. And now I'm going to use this as a reason to continue to level up. I'm not going to respond to conflict by saying now I'm limited, by agreeing with what someone else is trying to frame me as, right? Because conflict offers you an opportunity. Do I want to grow from this opportunity, or do I want to confirm that I'm limited by this opportunity? And some conflict will in some sort of way limit you, but you can still ask the question. I still ask the question, okay, so what else can I do? What can I do now in the face of this, despite this, as a response to this? The only real power we have is response, right? So, that's my big takeaway from in terms of emotional digestion.
I love that, because I'm going to be honest. I usually, if I get angry, then I'm just no good for the rest of the day. And it's not that I am stewing in it, but it's like I get myself so fired up that I have just burnt off any kind of mental energy that I now have. I do a lot of advocacy work for students with mental health needs, and I'll go into meetings and it'll be like I'm talking to the wall when I'm talking to some of the school teams, and I'll get just so fired up over it. And then I can't. So I might have to use your techniques in the future. Because I'd love to be like, yeah, let's work out, instead of what I do, which is just like sit and zone out for the rest of the day.
Listen, I know exactly what you mean. I was clocking out yesterday, and I looked at my car. I said, Chris, you didn't clock out the day before. I said, because you were angry. You were angry, and maybe that's part of our stuff. I don't know, but that used to, and that was an issue I had a lot when I was in my early 20s. I would get upset about something in the world injustice or something, and it was my day. It was my day for so long, where until I literally slept, I was no good. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. I'm not, but I was just overwhelmed, I guess. And
it's a passion thing. People with ADHD tend to have these very strong, like, this is right and this is wrong. And it doesn't matter if in reality, if it is right or wrong, but like, we are very passionate when we have this is our right and this is our wrong. And when somebody goes against our grain, then it's just like, no, like it's very hard to accept that.
Yeah. Tricky. tricky
Which I
stuff.
guess on one end, it's not, I think people with ADHD probably have very high ethical values
I
as
hope
long
so.
as they're well aligned, right?
Right, right, right.
But it does like it just rubs us the wrong way, and we have a hard time recovering. So we'll have to talk about that because I definitely could use some recovery tips in the
Absolutely.
future, so that I'm not just zoned out on TikTok for the rest of the day because I don't want to talk to anybody. It doesn't really work as a mom when you're just like, I can't talk to anyone right now.
Well, I mean, I've learned for myself. A friend of mine, Lawrence Crook, great guy. He made the point to me once. He said, "Chris," he spoke specifically about being angry at work, and he said, "Well, you can't be angry at work. It's not productive." And I was like, "That's a very simple truth. It's not productive. There are times when anger is productive. There are times, you know, if you have a customer complaint, anger can be beautiful, but it's a matter of saying, well, what are you going to do with this energy, right? Because it's an energy. It shifted your attention. It's shifting your physiology, shifting your blood pressure. What are you going to do? How do you make this productive? How do you make this work for you without ruining someone's day, violating someone else's space, being rude in some sort of way, making someone feel small or being vengeful? How do you grow yourself with that energy? Which is why I like using, you know, workout helps. It's a very clean January for me, so I'm eating vegan. There's no alcohol, etc. So my coworker, social worker, said, "Well, this offers you an opportunity to use healthier coping mechanisms." I was like, "You're right. I'm mad at you, but you're right." But that's the essence of growth, you know, and that's a beautiful thing. I believe we're convinced that growth continues until we're about 25, and then you're just kind of plateaued and just maybe physically shift. But
No, it's lifelong.
lifelong. And you know, I realize as I get older, like there's little room and value for me to be angry at work, around my loved ones, around my kid. There's no value for it. So I have to learn how to either process and digest or quickly mask and hold off until the appropriate time is ready and I can take a long walk at night and just chew through it in my head. But
No,
yeah,
absolutely.
whatever healthy mechanisms you have out there, those listening, lean on them. Healthy ones, the ones that are productive.
Yeah, and list them. Maybe share them in the chat or something too, and let me know what those are because I might need to start incorporating them into my life. Well, tell me, so you've written a book too. So help your toddler meet their milestones. 100, I think I said 101 earlier, but 101 behavior hacks. Tell me about this. Especially I have children who are older than their toddler years, but definitely interested to hear about this.
Love to. So help your toddler meet their milestones, 101 behavior hacks, which you can get on 101behaviorhacks.com or Amazon. And I was looking to write a web course during the pandemic, right? Everyone had pause, everyone had time, and everyone had money concerns, or I imagine most people did. So I said, okay, so what do I do now? My wife is 3 months pregnant with our first child, and my job is shut down because we work one-on-one with kids, face-to-face. There are 2 and 3-year-olds who don't really have the skills for hygiene yet. Age-based alone. Yep. So what am I going to do? And I thought to myself, well, you have a lot of knowledge, so maybe you could write a web course and sell that. And I started writing it, and there was no time to really flesh it out too much because my wife's pregnant. I gotta cook 3 times a day to make sure she's getting all pure, organic, clean meals. This is still the phase when we're wiping down groceries. Yeah. There's lines outside the store, etc. And then the world just continued to kind of snowball, and I put pause in that for a while. But then, at the beginning of last year, I got a mentorship program opened up, an author mentorship program opened up, saying, you know, if you are a nonprofit author, here's an opportunity to write a book, and we're going to teach you the ins and outs, literally from cover to spine to back, of how to write a book and everything in between. And we always recommend that you write 10 chapters on your topic. And I said to myself, well, that's in perfect alignment because my web course had 10 courses. So I said, let me check this out. And it was created by Raymond Aaron. He's a Chicken Soup for the Soul author, great guy. And, you know, he helped guide me to understand how to deliver my information to an audience. And so I began writing, and it just flowed. I started writing it at the end of February. I finished writing it in April. Wow. I already had the information. I didn't really have to think about it. And one of the best things, if anyone out there is listening and they're asking themselves, well, how do I write a book that fast? 2 things for you to think about. 1, don't start with chapter 1. Don't say chapter 1, intro, so blah, 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 blah. Start with what you already know. Start with what you love to talk about, love to write about. so you can just get into flow. Because so much of getting anything done is breaking the ice and starting. It's the chewing it over and mulling and want to be perfect and the wrap. Get started. And I think I started with chapter 6, although that's manners. So probably chapter 7 I started with rules. And then I started jumping around, picky eating. Okay, I'm going to talk about aggression. I'm going to talk about socializing. I'm going to talk about the function of behavior. Now I'm going to talk about how, pediatricians had to change the milestones in response to what they're seeing from the pandemic, which is an unfortunate situation. There's actually been an explosion of developmental delays after the pandemic, not because of greater awareness. I'm just going to say that, not because of greater awareness. It's because, unfortunately, kids weren't exposed to the socializing community that we as humans require for the optimal cognitive development. And it's no one's fault. Please do not feel guilty. It is what it is. But the important thing is to recognize, what do I do now, right? Our only power is a response. How do I respond?
Thank you for saying that, by the way, because I think that's a very valid statement that needs to be said. Not only this is how it is, but the fact that it isn't anybody's fault. It's not teacher's fault. It's not. It's just the way that it is because of what happened.
Right. There's no avoiding it. The world got hit with the pandemic all at once. This literally never happened in all of human history, at all. Areas, not the whole world. So I'm working on this book, and at the same time, my daughter is developing, and I'm witnessing human development for the first time through the eyes of a father. And through that day-to-day experience. So after working with kids with autism and focusing on helping them meet their milestones for 16 years, I'm looking at my daughter and I'm like, okay, you're doing this. Let me see if you can do this. And the first thing that really opened my mind to this was, it was 3 months before I started writing this book, right? True story. It's Christmas time. We're over at my father-in-law's, my in-laws, and we're sitting at the table. I'm sitting at the table with my baby, and my wife's dad is across the table, and he used to be a teacher, and he's really, really good with kids. It's interesting, like with young kids. And he just smiles at her and he just taps the table. Bop, bop, bop. She's 4 months old, okay? And she looks at him and she just imitates him. Bop, bop, bop. Right, super cute. But for me, that was another eureka moment, because in ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, we literally write programs to teach imitation, because kids learn through imitation, as you know. Observation first, imitation. Attention is obviously required. And one of the programs that I give my 2.5-year-olds, 3-year-old kids is imitating tapping a table. And this is a program that some of my kids won't get for weeks. And, at which point I'm telling the staff, like, well, what reinforcer are you using? What's your schedule of reinforcement? Are you praising them? Are you? And when like, yes, after I either decide, okay, I'm going to shift the prompt level or I'm going to change the program altogether. But it's a 2-year-old, it's targeting 2-year-olds. And at best, they're getting it in 3 days, at best. Yeah. My daughter got it 4 months, and that's when I started to see the difference between the mental age of the students I work with and what children are generally able to do if given the proper optimal experience or optimal grounds for education, right? Again, I'm not saying that kids who are on the spectrum don't have that. I'm just talking from a neurotypical point of view, what is possible. So I started seeing, okay, you can imitate. What else can you do? And I started throwing different things at her, right? So fine motor skills. I said, let me give you a little finger buffet. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of just ropes of different thicknesses, and so you can start developing your dexterity. And she's getting in, like, okay, let me do this. And it was the big changeover was at about 10 months old. I thought to myself, I'm going to get you pointing. She was babbling and she was starting to repeat parts of words at this point. She's mama, dad, she's saying that at 9 months or what have you. But I don't think she was using words fully meaningfully. She might have been. We really took track of that. But regardless, at 10 months, I know I got her pointing, right? I said, let me see if I can get you to point. And so physically guide her to make a pointing gesture, to touch things that she wanted. I did that a couple of times in one day, and she got it. And I said to myself, okay, now I need to replicate this, right? Because I'm thinking with my behavior scientist mindset. If it's not replicable, it doesn't count. Anyone out there who does their own research, if it's not replicable, it doesn't count.
Yeah.
Stop relying on lit reviews. Sorry, I'm a jerk, but
no, as a researcher, I'm actually internally chuckling very heavily on that.
So I called up 4 friends of mine who all had a child within 2 weeks of my baby's birthday. All right. And I asked, hey, is your kid pointing yet? And they all said, no, my kid's not pointing. I said, okay, try doing this and this and this for the next 2 to 3 days straight. Okay. And they said, sure. And 48 hours later, 3 of them reached out to me and said, "My kid's pointing. It worked." I'm like, "Yes." The one who didn't
Mhm.
found out at about 16 months that her child has level 3 autism. So
Mm.
that was the indicator of why she
Hmm.
wasn't able to quite capture that.
Mhm.
But I'm still working with her as I can to help guide her and be there for her and support her. But the other 3 confirmed for me that this works, that what I do for a living isn't just something that needs to be done for kids in an EI setting, in a clinical setting. It can be transformed for parents just generally to help their kids move through milestones faster.
Mhm.
And so I said, you got to share this, man. This is the key. And then I started realizing, wait a second, I also manage I emotion manage my students and help them get through tantrums. And that's honestly like my like, people don't quite understand how I'm able to do it when my kids are having a tantrum or a meltdown. I'm very good at like bringing anxiety down. And I was like, wait, this is tantrums. I see it as, helping my kid self-regulate.
Mhm.
Parents of typical kids, neurotypical kids, see this as tantrums. Like, I can help them too. So I was like, let me put this in a book and start marketing this, because maybe there's more I can do than just what I'm doing.
Mhm.
And that's the long and short of it. More long.
Wow. That but that's amazing, and I love it, and I love that it all just kinda stemmed from watching your child develop and going, "You know what? I can do more, I can help other people," and then the testing that I love it. I think that's fantastic. So tell listeners one more time, if they are interested, where they can get that book.
Absolutely. They can go to 101behaviorhacks.com. That's 101behaviorhacks.com. You can get the paperback, you can get the paperback, ebook. You can find it on Amazon as well. And feel free to reach out. Contact is Chris at 101behaviorhacks.com with questions. If your child is a picky eater, if they are 15 months or older and they're not really using words, if you have concerns, let me know. Talk to your pediatrician as well. Ask your pediatrician questions. Don't be afraid to ask your pediatrician questions. They have answers. Otherwise, they can find the answers. But time is the most valuable commodity, especially with your kids' development. 80% of the brain develops between birth and 3, so take advantage of that window. If you want to find me on IG, you can find me at Behavior Booster or at Chris Lake, and that's _Chris.Lake_. And check out some of my posts. I have a blog at 101behaviorhacks.com as well that talks about all the issues we discussed today, as well as other developmental goals and techniques that parents can use to help their child get through. So feel
I
free to
love
reach out, guys. I'm here.
I love that. And then you also did I see that you have a recent partnership with One's Network?
Yes, yes. So the Honest Network reached out to me um, after they closed casting call. I was kind of surprised because they said, we closed casting, but we would like to invite you to be a content creator for us. And it's a contract until the Super Bowl, and then after that, there's an opportunity to be on the Roku TV show. And I said to myself, yes, that sounds great. I want to ideally spread this kind of information globally. I think
Mhm.
that parents could use the information to help their kids meet their milestones, understand behavior a little bit better, and realize they do have a lot more power than they may realize. They have power through tantrums, they have power through picky eating, and to really just raise that level of confidence and awareness. So I'm excited. I'm really excited.
That's really fun. So what kind of, content are you is it, like, social media content? Is it what kind of the content
So,
look like, I
so,
guess?
so, so right now it's all social media content. So I'll just have conversations. Right now I'm doing 1 minute reels and explaining, okay, guys, so here's a thought on tantrums. If your child is having a tantrum, here's how you can get them through it. Okay, guys, here's a thought on introducing rules. Using if, excuse me, using if then statements is a great formula that your child can digest. And if a parent heard that, really take that to heart and check my blog, because it does help kids how you clearly communicate to them your expectations. I communicate to them how to help your child overcome picky eating, because there are ways to overcome picky eating, but it is on the parent. I have to stress this. Our job is to recognize that raising the kid is on us. It's not on the kid to figure it out. It's not a matter of time. It's not just a phase. It's what we do. It's how we respond to their behavior that will ultimately shift their behavior in a way you want to see or a way that makes you complain. Um, and that's not to cast blame. I am aiming to make people aware. And when you're armed with awareness, you have a shield and a sword that makes life a bit easier.
100%. 100%. Well, I want to open up another rabbit hole then before we wrap up, because you kind of started on it earlier. Tell me more about the plant-based that you have found in trying to heal, or how it might be related to neurodiversity. You kind of started to open up that rabbit hole. I know we backed out because you're answering another question, but I was like, we got to come back to it because I'm interested in hearing
all right.
this.
So, wow, this is a rabbit hole. You have been warned. So, understanding that cilantro and other compounds in plants and plants in general have positive effects when it comes to toxic heavy metals. Through extensive research that I did, I kept asking the question of Google search, what removes lead from the body? What removes lead from the bloodstream? And I found two things in particular effective: cilantro and algae. So chlorella is an algae, spirulina is an algae. Those two are very effective, and especially combined, at removing these systems from your body. And we all have lead, we all have toxic heavy metals in our system. We all have PFAS, but that's another conversation, in our system. And I even once did a 40-day detox. And let me try taking this for 40 days. And this is a true story. What happened after it was 40 days, and I kept going for a little bit because it took 6 weeks. So it was like day 42 or 43. And I was driving to see a student of mine in College Point. And as I'm driving, someone unnecessarily just swerved and cut me off. And the earlier me would have been just, oh, now I'm gonna tailgate you and drive to make you very uncomfortable as my as my revenge. But this day, for no reason in particular, I said, what a jerk. And then I paused. I said, who just jumped into your body and responded like that to that? And I was so confused. And so I went home. I saw my student, and we worked on the skill sets we had to target for the day. And then I went home and looked up, like, can shifting this affect emotions? And in fact, it did. I was easier for me to no big deal things. I had a bigger no big deal box, And I told my friend recently that I think in life what makes me a happy guy is that there's two boxes in my head. And one is the dead to rights to complain about box. So this happened, I'm dead to rights to complain about it. I'm gonna let the world know. And then there's a no big deal box. And my no big deal box is huge. And my dead to rights to complain box is very small. And so when I'm able to throw things in the no big deal box, I just keep it moving. And I don't have my heart rate go up. I don't feel these feelings I don't want to have. I just recognize that person made a bad choice. And I'm gonna go and make a good choice emotion and just keep on moving. So this mental fog lifted as a result of taking this combination for a couple of days. And when I can, I try to keep myself really healthy with super greens. Right now, I'm eating wheatgrass. I mix it with water and some lemon juice. And I'm going to do that for January. Every January, I go super clean, vegan, plant-based, whole food diet. And energy goes through the roof. My thinking gets clearer. And those of you who are neurodiverse on the spectrum, I would definitely like to say, explore for you what healthy eating does for you. I'm not saying supplements. I'm going to say healthy eating. If clean eating has a result for you in 2-3 weeks, stick with it. Stick with it. I find it's easier for me to organize myself, think, stick in the emotional spectrum I want to be in when I eat healthy or I detox. But that aside, I continue to do this research on what removes lead from the body, toxic heavy metals, and I found different things again. Chlorella, spirulina, cilantro, quercetin. I was curious why vitamin C, iron are the only things, and calcium are prescribed in response by a lot of doctors. And I understand that they block the reabsorption, they block future absorption, but they don't tackle the present issue. I do a lot of nonprofit work, lobbying, coalition work regarding childhood lead poisoning in New York. I'm on the Lead-Free Kids New York Coalition as well, and we push for different laws. I actually got the blood testing in New York State changed, right? Once I realized, wait a second, that's what I did after the first fashion show. Like after we didn't raise any money, but my social media campaign on Twitter about how New York has 10 micrograms per deciliter that we accept versus CDC's new thing, I could still push, and I kept pushing it, and then I said, well, why don't I just meet with legislators? Like, how does it work? And I started grassroots lobbying. I don't give money or take money or any of that. I just walk up to a legislator, set up an appointment. And then I said, let's do this. And eventually someone bit. They said, okay, let's draft a bill. They introduced a bill, and it took 3 years. I thought it was low-hanging fruit. It took 3 years. And then,
Wow.
yeah, it passed. But if you're persistent, that's the thing. Whenever you're pushing for legislation, you got to do your homework, got to know the fine print, have to know a specific bill you want to change or create, and expect it to take time. It's not going to be a home run first year that's introduced, unless you have a lot of people buying in and so on. But down the road, it took 4 years after research that for whatever reason, I changed the algorithm. And one day, I think it was after a beautiful vacation in Peru, I said, you know what? Let me ask this. What reverses lead poisoning? What reverses brain damage in particular? Because that's the big issue for me. While lead has a number of issues, including high blood pressure, kidney damage, etc. My issue is, well, it's making it hard for these kids to learn because they can't remember. Ultimately, lead makes it difficult to remember. Maybe not impossible, but difficult. And I found a plant that just changed my world. It's called the Tridax daisy. It grows in subtropical climates, and we could talk about this more in depth for some time after this, etc. It grows in subtropical climate. It's basically a weed. It's not a very pretty plant, but inside it has a compound called 7,8-dehydroxyflavone. Okay, and I'm gonna make the comparison that vitamin C's real name is L-ascorbic acid. So L-ascorbic acid is to oranges as 7,8-dehydroxyflavone is to the Tridax daisy. All right.
Okay.
Right? Because otherwise, it drives me nuts that his name is so convoluted and long. I'm talking to people, I'm going to lose them. But, I mean, it would lose me if I wasn't so invested. Like, what are you saying? I don't care. So, this study done by Dr. Tomás Guillarte and his team in Colombia, and they teamed up with another team in China. They tested it on mice. They gave mom mice, pregnant mom pups, lead acetate, so that for 15 days before the pups were born, and then they gave the pups this lead acetate diet for 35 days afterwards, right? To simulate, what a lead poisoning level of like 20 micrograms per deciliter would be in a 2 or 3 year old. Okay, and at that point, the kid's got some brain damage. And so then they gave these mice this three times a day. They gave them this compound, 7,8-dehydroxyflavone, and easier said it's called tropoflavin, so I'm going to refer to it as tropoflavin moving forward. Okay. And so they gave a tropoflavin for 15 days, doc. For 2 weeks, they gave them tropoflavin. And what caught me is that the results were all of the mice reversed the functioning issues in their brain after 15 days. And what got me was that I said all, because you and I both know when you read studies, the language you're going to see is a statistically significant portion of blah, 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 blah. And you're like, well, all right, so how does that play out in the real world? They said, no, every single mice, there was an exception, saw a reversal of the loss of function, all right? And the loss of function is particularly in the Schaefer collateral of the hippocampus, which is basically, for people who are listening, I just lost, that is the doorway to memory, okay? So when we experience life, the stimuli goes into our brain, and the neural network brings it down to your hippocampus, and there's a little doorway called the Schaefer collateral, but the hippocampus stores that memory for 2 weeks. It says, okay, before this is a permanent memory, we're going to hang on to this, and we're going to see if you reactivate us at all, if you really had a strong enough emotional tie to it. And if you do, boom, it's going to be sent to other parts of the brain that are in some way involved with that, generally based on how your sense, whether it was a physical memory, visual, audio, etc. And but if that's damaged because of lead, you can't remember. And that's what lead does. Lead replaces calcium, lead replaces iron. And those are two very important aspects in neurotransmitter transmission, in action potential going throughout your brain. But what this plant does is beautiful because it doesn't remove a stitch of lead, okay? Their function was restored despite the fact that lead was still there. But, right. Fascinating stuff. And it's just a plant. So what the plant does, it's called a BDNF mimetic. So BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And I liken that to the fuel to learning, the fuel to that chain that was required for the message to reach from outside of you to that hippocampus point where you're going to remember. Without it, the message isn't going anywhere. You're not releasing transmitters. It's basically going to release transmitters, and it's also going to tell the recipient, hey, I liked receiving that message. Send me more. And they physically grow closer together because of action on the dendritic spine. Again, not to lose people, but it makes your brain more efficient. It makes your brain able to remember. So this plant replaces that. It imitates it. It imitates that component. And so your brain's able to send a message anyway. It almost leapfrogs over the lead, so to speak. And the message gets there and the brain is able to remember and you're able to learn. And I'm like, but the issue is, right? In America in particular, by law, plants cannot be labeled as medicine. They cannot. That's the law. They cannot. That's a big part. That's a huge part. And the other part where I can be like, oh, I hate to admit it, but to be fair, they can't guarantee the consistency if someone in Vermont is growing this plant versus someone in California versus what pesticides are using versus, so that's the part where I'm like, all right, from a scientifically objective point of view, I get it. You can't guarantee the consistency, but you can say that there's potential. However, it can be used as a supplement because, like I said, vitamin C is also not medicine. We all know vitamin C is good for us. We all know that vitamin B12 is good for us. Yeah. These things are derived from plants as well. And if you go into your medicine cabinet or wherever you have your vitamins and you look on the bottle, on the back, you will see it says, not FDA evaluated, not meant for preventing, treating, or mitigating any disease. And my goal right now is to have tripoflavin hit that same status. And I'm actually working with 2 teams in Uganda to administer this to children with lead poisoning. And it's going to take a couple months.
Wow.
I mean, I look at it like I can, so let me try. I can, so let me try. I had a talk during International Lead Poisoning Prevention Week through World Health Organization where I actually explained tripoflavin and its potentials and how we need to be looking into it. And I think that down the line, we will see this as common as vitamin C as something that we can use. It'll be a supplement that can be recommended. Listen, prenatals aren't FDA evaluated, but we all know they work. We all know it. So that's my mentality. Like let's elevate that to the same level as prenatals for people who have lead poisoning. And mind you, not just lead poisoning. You're gonna go. You're gonna research 7,8-dehydroxyflavone.
I am. I'm very interested now.
It's so fascinating. Also research BDNF because the implications are huge. It helps to heal the brain, and there's thousands of studies that have used this, not just for lead poisoning, but for Parkinson's-like syndromes, for Huntington's-like syndromes, for Alzheimer's-like syndromes. And I have to use that word "like," folks, because it's mice and they don't really, it's different biology, but they're still seeing the brain regain its neuroplasticity, regain its synaptoplasticity, and there's neurogenesis. New cells are being grown as a result of this. Right. And I think we're on the cusp of seeing a new understanding of our brain because of this plant. I'm so excited. I can't even I'm so excited for what's coming next. And I'm glad that I can spread the word. I'm glad you've given me a platform to spread the word. Thank you.
No, it's fascinating. I'm glad that I came back and circled back to it because it's really fascinating to hear about this. And I'm glad that there is someone like you out there who is passionate and is out there and is sharing this because, I have met other people too who are passionate about plant medicine. And I have worked with them before. I'm a migraine sufferer and they have turned me on to different things. And then I had been years and years of being on prescription migraine medication. They give me try this supplement or this, and then it's gone. And you're like, why don't more people know about these things? And so I love giving Anytime a platform for this kind of stuff because I think it's important, and it's important for us to continue to talk about it, how there's other options out there beyond just the pharmaceutical. And not that there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes we need that. That's what you got to do. But sometimes it's also nice to have other options.
Listen, that is amen, sister. First of all, it is nice to have other options. It's good to have diversity in options. And that's literally what my charity was born on. I remember when I gave a speech at that fashion show, I said, we need to accept the fact that not all medicine needs to come out of an orange bottle. And it's true because certain things can help, and we don't need it to always be synthesized by a pharmacological agent that's publicly traded. It can be things that grow out of our backyard. It would be nice if doctors could sit down with us and be like, hey, listen, your blood pressure is really high. You can get this medication, or you can also start drinking dandelion tea every single day. You can incorporate ginger into your diet more often. Here are some things that will be helpful. and they can still give the warning. However, don't take this with this. There's an ethical way to present the availability of options, but currently we simply don't really do that, and I'm flummoxed. But I have faith that in the future we will grow into a new mindscape and accept that nature can be healing as well.
I definitely hope so. Well, I know we're getting close to the end of our time together. So before we go, though, I do want to ask you the question that I like to ask all of my guests who come on the show. And that is, if you could give any advice to youth or young adults who are currently struggling with their social, emotional, or academic health, and I'll even put academic health in there as the realm, what advice would you give?
Okay. Biggest advice I would give is begin to learn yourself. Begin to examine yourself. Ask yourself new questions. When you are aiming to understand the world around you, it's critical that you understand yourself. And I don't mean that from a selfish or solipsistic point of view, but I mean that in how do I respond to this kind of scenario? How do I respond to these people? Understand your behavior. Understand what's not working. Be honest with yourself with what's not working, and be okay with changing. Be okay with change. Change is going to happen regardless. We change every single day. We change our clothes. The weather changes. So be open to change and ask yourself, well, how can I change with that? And then decide for yourself. Sit down with yourself when you can and ask, how do I want to be? Who do I want to be? A lot of times as youth, we ask, what job do you want? What career do you want? And that's an insufficient question, in my opinion, to ask children who haven't been introduced to at least 200 different career options. Because there's so many. There's so many. I didn't know industrial engineers were a thing until I went to New Orleans to help rebuild houses. And at that point, I was 23. And I said to myself, if I knew this was an option, I would have leaned in this direction. But again, understand who you are, understand how you want to be, and understand what doesn't work for you, both in terms of your behavior and others. And if it comes down to behavior of others is a major issue for you, then understand how to communicate to others how this is affecting you. Use I statements more than you statements. I feel when you talk to me this way, you don't respect me. I feel that it would be best for me to exit this conversation right now. Aim to understand communication. Communication is king. Aim to understand time. It's the most valuable commodity. Aim to understand yourself. There's only one you, and no one should understand you better than you.
I love it. That advice is perfect and wonderful and a great way to end our show today. So, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. I truly enjoyed having you here as a guest.
As did I. Thank you so much, Doc. This has been a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, thank you again to all my listeners for tuning in, and I will look forward to seeing you next week on the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. Bye. The Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast is an Eccleston Education Consulting, LLC production.